Hello everyone. I'm Daniel Pharos or Daniel Noah Pharos or whatever. And the name of my talk today is Power of Game Music and Lithuanian Themes in Crowns and Pawns. It's a bit of a longish title. So first let's start a bit with some things about me. So I started in game audio around 2008, so commercially and so on. And after a few projects, I thought let's try it full time. So I was full-time provider of music and sound effects for games as a freelancer. And if you do that and you try to fully sustain yourself, you work on a lot of games. So somehow I ended up having worked on 135 games so far, which is a bit cheating, of course, because some of these are tiny, like phone games with 5 sound effects. That's still a game. But I also worked on browser games, indie games of various sizes, and a few medium to bigger PC and console titles. 2019, I was hired by Black Forest Games as an audio director, working on games like Destroy All Humans 1 and 2, those remakes, if anybody has seen them. And since this year, I switched companies, and now I'm audio director at Novaquark, which is a French company. And as it always is in the games industry, we're working on something I can't talk about. Yay. Okay, and I also worked on this one, so kind of got spoiled. That's Crowns and Pawns. You heard about it earlier. And so that there are not only examples about Crowns and Pawns musically. At the end of the talk, I'm gonna quickly play the main theme for you. So, and how did this come about? How did we get together, me, small game audio provider from Germany, and game developer from Lithuania? Well, it's happened, as you have seen earlier, I started commercially in 2008, but I started trying to work on games a few years earlier. And one of my big first things I did, I worked for a fan adventure called Broken Sword 2.5, which was actually, for a fan adventure, quite a huge project. And I wrote 50 songs for that, not knowing what I did, completely beginner, making a lot of mistakes. And a certain Sharunas also worked on that game. And yeah, he kind of remembered me and hit me up years later and asked me whether I would like to work on his new game. And of course I said yes right away. And we're gonna hear a bit more about, not Broken Sword, but about Crowns and Pawns later. But first we're also gonna have to talk a bit about game music, because that's also on the name of the talk. It's the power of game music. I want to spend a few minutes trying to find out what's so special about game music, what it can do. And not only is the history of game music a bit weird. It's a very singular history, because when video games started, they were very small and nobody would have expected where they would end up. Here we see Pong 1972 or something. And composing music for a video game back then was soldering different resistors on a circuit board, which created different pitched beep sounds, and that was it. It's not a very comfortable way to compose music, and also Of course, nobody did take that medium serious at that point. It went on for a few years like that. People were actually hacking frequencies into their code. Like they had to write the frequencies in hertz to create certain pitched notes, until people like pictured Chris Hülsbeck, childhood hero and friend of mine. He started working with and developing, among other people, software with which you could actually type in proper notes and note lengths into your computer, tracker software and so on. So slowly, if you were like very nerdy and very big with computers, you could start composing music. It kinda exploded from there when the CD-ROM standard became more present. Pictured is The Seventh Guest, one of the first games that actually had a full soundtrack on a CD-ROM, because funnily, games were tiny at that point. So before the CD-ROM, games came on 1 or 2 tiny discs that are smaller than your typical mail attachment. And some games had like 10 discs, so they were like staggering 15 megabytes big or so. And so they had the CD-ROM that had so much space and almost nothing to put on it. So people started like thinking, hey, we can actually record bands or like orchestra and so stuff like that. And since then, game music kind of rose so that it can actually compete and be compared with the longer existing things like film music and so on. But that still doesn't really tell us what makes game music special. To find out what is so special about it, I would like to start comparing it to film music, because film music is usually the thing that aspiring game composers look at if they want to aim high. So they're usually dreaming of making music for film, maybe even for Hollywood, because that's like the big guys, the Premier League of soundtracks. So it's a good starting point to find out what is so special about game music if we compare those two. So they have a bunch of common things, common functions, which some people, usually when I teach some people, there are always 1 or 2 people that are at the present state of game music equals Tetris. So somehow, even when you have students that are involved with music and they're using modern tools, some people still don't know what's going on with games. So these things are present in game music and film music. For example, themes like the hero's theme, the villain's theme, or the theme of redemption, or whatever, the evil theme, and so on. Musical themes, like in a movie, we have them in video game music too. Amplification, what I call amplification here, you could also call it the salt. If you add music to things, you make everything more intense. For example, a love scene, just a fight scene. If you add music to the fight scene, suddenly it gets more exciting. A race, and so on. So amplifying what the movie or the game does by adding music works the same. Framing a scene. You can use music to paint a picture about the things you don't see on screen. For example, you have a garden party, and in the background you hear like a minuet from Mozart, or you hear some death metal. Paints a completely different picture where the scene is, what's happening around the screen. And finally, and maybe most importantly, you can also work with the subtext. So you see things on screen, you hear the people talk, but you don't know what it means. What's the importance of this? Or what should I feel about this scene? And if you think about a scene like 2 people meeting in the park, and you add some happy, cheerful music, then you, as an audience, you instinctively know, oh, that's a positive thing that's happening there. They re-meet finally, 2 lovers back united. Or you add like ominous music, that might be, oh, something bad is about to happen. Oh, the terrorists met for the first time, or a car's gonna plow over them in a minute. So showing the same scene, adding different music, applies a certain subtext and context. So again, we have these things in common. Here's a tiny example for framing a scene. So Crowns and Pawns to me is a traveling game. It's one of those adventures where part of the allure is that you travel the world in search of secrets and solutions. And if you go to different places, you can set the scene for these wonderfully by adding a certain music to make you feel like you're actually visiting different places and so on. Okay, and now about unique things about it. So one of the big topics about games is interactivity. So if you think about it, a video game is one of the only things, maybe the only thing, that is consumable on your own and is audiovisual and interactive. Because usually you as an audience member, you consume something that is audiovisual and you do not take part in the story. You do not interact with it. You just consume it and hopefully enjoy it. If you take a scene like a typical scene in a movie where a gangster runs into a hotel lobby, looks around a bit and flees up the stairs, and the hero is following, looks around a bit, finds out where the gangster has ran off to, and follows up. If you work for a movie director, the movie director might tell you, okay, this scene is 17 seconds long and we want the music to come in here and change here and go out here. So that's a precise science. You can really completely control what you do as a composer, but you can't in a video game, because for you, the scene, for any player, the scene might go like described, or just the hero enters the scene and then he spends 20 minutes looking at all the art assets and Easter eggs that have been left in the hotel lobby, and you don't know what's happening. Maybe he runs into the hotel lobby and runs back out again. So we have to kind of play around that, work with that. We have to prepare so we can cover these things, and that kind of leads to variability. A movie is set in stone. The movie might, let's keep aside things like a director's cut, but usually the movie is 1 hour, 23 minutes long, and it always will be. But a video game there's so many variables. So our hero might never go into the hotel, or might come back later when the chase is not on anymore. So you might need extra music. That is not a chase scene. He might run around the hotel or whatever, go wherever he wants. So this leads to sometimes more music, sometimes different music. It creates all kinds of funny and also difficult but also rewarding problems for you as a game composer to solve. And now we come to the really juicy bits. Yes, interactivity and variability is great, but music in video games can have even more jobs, actual functions that are helping the game developer, helping the player. And one of these is conveying states. So we see here an instrument that tells the driver how fast he's going, which is helpful to him, of course. Video games have all kinds of these HUD elements that tell you things, but you can also move some of them into the music. Music could tell you if you're winning or if you're losing, if the dark side is winning or the good guys are winning. Music can tell you how much health you have left. Basically, you're concentrating on something else, and then you hear the music change and you notice, hey, I'm about to die, I should actually flee now. Without taking your eyes off the action and looking at HUD elements, which is a very common thing that many games do, is for immersion. Immersion, you move things away from like superficial HUD elements and into the diegetic space. Like, for example, you have a video game where you see how much ammo you have left on your weapon, so you don't have to be taken out of the story by adding your display on top of the actual scene. You can, if you want, you can do these things and have the music convey states. You could, another example would be the time of day or how much time you have left for a certain thing in a game. And talking of time, Music can also give guidance. So, as I said, it's just the logical step from conveying states is maybe the music helps you a bit, or helps the intention of the game developer a bit by guiding you. For example, let's imagine a video game where you are a vampire, and a sacred ground would hurt you, and you could tell the player how close he is getting to sacred ground just by starting some sacred church music or something. So he's not paying attention, he hears the music like, oh, I'm actually getting too close to a church or something, which would be helpful guidance. And guidance doesn't need to be left and right. Guidance can also be stay a while or get a move on. You can produce music that is very relaxing, that invites you to stay a while in a place, or you can add music that tells you to hurry up, which is helpful in very many ways for a game developer. And here's an example, a typical example for trying to add some excitement or guidance to a scene by adding some driving music that influences the player to hurry up a bit, or indicates that there might be a negative result if he waits too long. In some games these actually occur. There might be games where if you wait too long the bomb explodes, and in other games it's just it's an illusion. It's a well-meant illusion that indicates hurry up, or something else might happen. And here's an example for the music from Crowns and Pawns in this exciting chase scene. And if we take all that together, now there's another layer on top, which I really like. Music can even have like pedagogical functions. So the music can act as a teacher. It can teach you how to play the game, or even introduce behavior patterns which the game developer would like to hand over to you. For example, there might be negative things in your game. For example, your game, you might not want players to drive over pedestrians, so you can add negative music to negatively reinforce such behavior, which is a biological term. So basically, there's a negative bit of music. Players might subconsciously try to avoid hearing that because they don't like it. And other way around, you might positively reinforce behavior you as a game developer might like your players to show, which is also teaching them a bit how to play your game. So no, you're not supposed to let the princess drown. You're supposed to rescue the princess. Of course, that's doesn't happen all the time. And if it's too obvious, it kind of failed. So it must be, it's subtle, but I like those things. Okay, we can't really go into depth about how to do these things in this small talk, but I want to show you two basic systems of approaches, how some games try to use these dynamic music concepts. So variable music, dynamic music are terms we use for those things. And there are two basic concepts or approaches. I'm just quickly going to show them. Number one is the vertical approach, vertical layering. It's very common. If you look at this cake, just imagine the lowest layer of the cake is a very generic calm piece of music that plays in your level, in your video game, in your generic video game it just made up. And a second layer on top might be just drums and some more exciting things, which you can fade in as the enemies come, and as the enemies are defeated, you fade it back out again. So both pieces of music would just play side by side, but the second layer is set to 0 volume, and you fade it in and you fade it out, so you can fluently at whatever point you want increase the excitement of your music to support things like combat, things like dramatic choices, and you don't know when it's going to happen. We talked about interactivity and variability, so you can do this at any point. In such a vertical system, you could add even more layers, like in the picture, maybe a third layer for a boss fight, huh? Or you could add like stingers, transitionary pieces to hide the transition. That's a very common thing, because just imagine you're pulling up the volume of an exciting drum track. At any point, it might sound a bit weird, because you might fade it up in the middle of a drum hit or so a bit weird. So you can hide it by just putting a big percussion thing just when you do it, so you can secretly in the background fade in or fade out your exciting second layer. It's a very typical approach. The second one is less typical, but also quite cool, and that's a horizontal approach. Here's a picture of a game I worked on from a presentation. So just imagine, instead of vertically, we are working horizontally. So like a bit of Lego, you have on the left side, you have your building blocks. In this example, we have 3 different colors for 3 different intensities: green, yellow, and orange or red. So low intensity, mid intensity, high intensity. So on the right side, you see that's basically a example play of that thing. So for the first thing, it shows the green number 2, because we're not fighting, nothing's going on. It shows one of those at random. And always where there's a question mark, your engine, your music system, your middleware, whatever, looks at what's going on. Like, for example, okay, are there enemies around? Are we dying? Is the boss monster present? And on those little questions, it decides which piece of music to choose next. So in our example, the first 2 bits were just green, and then there was a switch, and we switched to mid-intensity because some enemies came through the door. The downside of this is it's less 100% flexible as the vertical thing, because the monster might come in just in the middle of a music piece, so a tiny music piece might still take 5 seconds to react to the monster coming in. Not ideal, but musically this can be much cooler. You can make long, complicated songs that use just small bits of music. So just imagine there's an orchestra, and there's a dude standing in the background raising colored flags. So the orchestra plays forever, then he raises the yellow flag, like, oh shit, switch to the other music now, and they dynamically change into a different song. You can do very cool things with this. Much rarer, sadly. And we reached the second part of the talk. Now let's look at all these things and apply them to crowns and pawns. So how does it happen when you approach a game like Crowns and Pawns? I first immediately, we both agreed that we don't need such a complicated dynamic music system. A point-and-click adventure is often has 2 different modes. One is the story goes on, something exciting happens, and the second mode is I'm thinking, I'm puzzling, I'm exploring, I want to take my time. So we didn't want music to constantly annoy you during these passages. And it kind of also helped that Broken Sword does a similar thing. Well, Common Love came back. So basically, we decided we want to have some music when you enter a location and when the story progresses, something important happens. And the musical foundation, I immediately knew I want something light orchestral, warm, positive. There are dark elements in the game, but I think to have this this foundation that is light, playful. It kind of takes you by the hand and shows you around the game, and I like that. But it helps if you, whenever you start a new game, it helps if you adopt a new paradigm. So if you open a book for a new game and slightly change the rules, you add things or you apply some things so that not every game is the same to you. It might be ideal for one game, but if you look at a composer's lifespan, you want your composer to be freshened up. You don't want him to make the same soundtrack all over again, and it helps to do those things. You're changing your rules because as a composer, you have a lot of internal soft rules. You have just the chords you like, the chord progressions you personally like, or some melody types you like, scales you like, and so on. And if you change that around, that constraint adds creativity and makes the project unique for yourself, maybe also for others. It always helps if you enjoy your work. And how do we do that? You can limit yourself with concerning the instruments. You could say, I don't want to use this. I want to make a rock soundtrack that doesn't use guitars. It's gonna be crazy, I like it. Or you use different musical scales and rhythms you usually don't use, but you're now gonna use it for this soundtrack because you think it's right. Or regions, genres, I want this fantasy game to only use blues music. That's gonna be wild. Or even, very rarely, recording methods. Just think of, I'm working on this survival game, I'm gonna record it in the forest. I'm gonna take all my instruments, walk into the forest and record everything there. It's gonna be different to every other project I ever worked on. I never did this, but I want now. And so how did we apply this to Crowns and Pawns? First is, as I said, it's a traveling game, and I thought it's gonna be cool if we fully lean into the traveling aspects. We visit different places, and we would like to have a regional feel, regional bits of music. So that brought with it different approach to writing, different instruments, and so on. It was also very exciting to me. And especially, of course, we were focusing on Lithuania. It got a bunch of extra love. And Tag of Joy really helped me along here by giving me a lot of leads. So I dove into Lithuanian folk music, read a lot of things, listened to a lot of things. And we even went one step further, and we wanted to quote some of it even. So this piece, which I will not try to pronounce to you, I really liked, and we used it a bit in the music. Also, we try to use Lithuanian instruments like the kanklės and the birbynė, to give it that extra effort for me to try to learn these instruments or to use them in slight ways. And I always try to do that. It's one of the most rewarding approaches to add a new paradigm to a game is try to learn a new instrument. I'm never gonna be great at those, but I don't have to, because you can just use small bits of melody and it just puts you in the right mindset and gives your soundtrack that certain special thing that others might not have, especially again for oneself as a composer, but maybe also for others. And coming to my final slide, the birbynė deserves an extra mention because it's a wonderful piece. We had a hard time to actually find one. So together we tried for a while, and we actually had to buy a used one from some musical student because it was really almost impossible to get one. And it is among its kind. It's great. It's a bit like a mixture between a horn and a clarinet. It's also a bit like a saxophone, but more wooden. So amazing instrument. Sadly, much too unknown. And somehow it ended up that I used it mostly for the most mystical elements of the game, because I think it felt so mystical and dreamy and old somehow. And here's an example, our final example. All right, that's it. Thanks. And yeah, I'm here for questions if you have some.
How long did it take you to learn that Lithuanian instrument?
Yeah, that was actually quite a hard one. So I think that's still the one that took me the most time to actually get one note out of it, because I also learned the duduk back in the day, a few years ago, and that was also hard because it's a reed instrument. So you are not blowing into this instrument, you are vibrating it with your mouth. That's so weird. And also the birbynė, you have to assemble yourself. So you not go to Amazon and get your birbynė. No, you have to buy a mouthpiece and then you wind a string around. It's hard to see in the picture, but near the mouthpiece there's like a clarinet mouthpiece, and you wind it with a leather band. And to get that right took me ages. And yeah, it's hard to play, but it's wonderfully rewarding. Thanks for the question. I mean, it took me, the actual answer is, took me 3 weeks of trying every day a bit until it actually worked out.
Thanks for the presentation. And I have a question. It looks like you really enjoy making music, but were there any moments when you were like, not for only this project, but all the projects included, those like 100 plus, what was the hardest one, or the more than one? What was hard to do, and how did you solve those problems you had?
Okay, I think some of the hardest ones is where you do work on the game and you think you're right, but the client or the developer disagrees. So, for example, you kind of sure you have the perfect music and they really don't like it. And the worst cases of those are when they just say, we don't like the song, and don't give you anything to work with, because you kind of have to learn to take it, basically. That you have to learn it very early. Many people like me come from a band background where you can still just ignore negative feedback because I know my punk band is the best in the world. I never read newspapers because I can't read or something. But when working with a client, you have to make them happy. They are paying. So those clients can be really tough. What I usually do is hand it over to a colleague. Like, okay, you do it. Because if they just some people actually don't like my style or so, and that's fine. But I also had projects where they just said, we don't like the song, and it was of course always negative to get that feedback, but we worked on it, and one of my most favorite pieces of music, we had 7 versions of the song, and I found out after just taking a deep breath and talking to the client, I found out they just wanted it to be more intense, more exciting. So I didn't change anything about the flow, harmonies or melodies of the song. I just tweaked up the excitement over 7 different versions, and now they loved it. So sometimes it helps, just take a deep breath, try to jump over your own ego, and sometimes you have to change your song to what you think is worse, but that's it. If you're a freelancer, you kind of have to follow the money. Make your client happy. That's always the most important thing. All these people.
I have a question. You mentioned layering, right? But what about changing the tempo of the song? Does that happen often dynamically?
If you want to do something like that, which I think is amazing, you kind of have to step back. You take a few steps back, because if you want to dynamically change the tempo, you kind of have to do it in a MIDI fashion, like many Nintendo games do. So basically, where you do not record a song and put it in your game as an MP3 or something. No, you kind of put the actual notes into your game, and your video game plays the music live, like in things like Super Mario, where you change which instrument plays the melody depending on what you equip or what you're doing. That's kind of cool. I do that so rarely, and there's some people who are really specialized in those things, but it's, yeah, you could do then, of course, just speed up the music however you like. Change the scales, switch out instruments and so on. That's kind of cool. I wish I could have the chance to do that more. Yeah, it's kind of nice.